Hey everybody, welcome back to Pulp Hero Audio. In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about something that has been going on lately in the publishing world as it relates to Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian and the comic books. Of course, most who are familiar with Conan comic books, you know that throughout most of their history, they've been published by Marvel Comics. There was a period of over a decade throughout most of the 2000s in which they were published by Dark Horse Comics, but now they are back at Marvel. Well, the interesting thing with Conan, and in particular the original Robert E. Howard Conan stories, is that as most of those stories were published, way back in the 1930s, those stories are now part of what is called the public domain. Robert E. Howard, he tragically committed suicide in 1936. So here we are in 2019. It's been 83 years since the death of Robert E. Howard. The man had no direct descendants, no children, anything like that. So any sort of copyrights or anything like that that may have existed involving Howard's original Conan stories have long since expired. And Conan, the character Conan, in particular, those Howard stories, they are part of the public domain. In a way, they belong to all of us. They belong to the public. Those stories that Howard wrote in the 30s, no one really has ownership of those anymore. They're something that belongs to all of us. Now, there is a distinct difference between copyright and trademark. Conan is still a trademarked character, that is owned by, Conan Properties International and whatever parent companies or anything that might be involved there. So, you can't just go out and, write a Conan novel or publish a Conan comic book or something like that and slap that trademarked name of Conan on the cover, okay, and sell it and make money off of it. That would violate the trademark of Conan and some of the other characters and things that are still under this trademark ownership. But when it comes to public domain, people have, long since found a way to get around such things. One interesting example would be DC Comics. They had a character called Captain Marvel. Well, they sort of let things expire where that character was concerned, and Marvel Comics created their own version of Captain Marvel and acquired the actual trademark to the name. So from that point on, DC Comics were still able to publish, Captain Marvel, even call him Captain Marvel in the comic books, but they could not market, they could not advertise, they could not put the name Captain Marvel on the cover. So as a result, all the marketing, all the titles and everything you see on the cover, refer to Shazam, because that was something that Marvel did not have any kind of trademark to. So it's kind of the same thing with, Conan. Theoretically, you could take things from Robert E. Howard's original stories that are now in the public domain and you could write and adapt, stories, comic books, whatever, from that original public domain material. And as long as you did not market it, sell it, as, Conan, one of those trademarked names or something like that, then it should be theoretically perfectly fine. And we have seen this happen at least in the international publishing world. Things are a little different in other countries, than the United States. We saw several of Howard's stories being adapted into comic book form by a French publishing company some years ago, a French publishing company called Glenat, or however that is pronounced. I don't claim to be French or anything. So you had those French Conan comics adapted and published and made available in Europe and places like that, but not over here in the United States. That is until very recently, when it was announced that a United States-based publishing company, comic book company called Ablaze, would be publishing English translations of those French Glenat Conan comics and make them available for the first time, in English in the States. And, as an American who did not have easy access to those European comics and who doesn't speak French or anything like that, these Ablaze comics sounded like, a really great idea. And again, to avoid the trademark situation, they cleverly did not market, they did not title their comics, which were supposed to be published for the first time this year. They did not market them, publish them under any of those trademark names, in particular Conan. Instead, they were going to call their comic book The Cimmerian. Okay, because, Samaria, Cimmerian, that is not something that Robert E. Howard created, at least not the word. Samaria, Cimmerian, that is a word from antiquity, that has been around in literary and historical documents and things long before Robert E. Howard. It would be like someone's, saying, I own Atlantis. You can't make stories set in Atlantis. You can't put Atlantis on the cover of a book. Well, Atlantis, is a place, is a term that has been around a lot longer than any sort of copyright or trademark or anything like that. So Ablaze, the publishing company, were all set to produce these the Cimmerian comic books beginning this October with their first issue, which was going to be a direct adaptation of Robert E. Howard's story, The Queen of the Black Coast. And, The Queen of the Black Coast, published in the early 1930s, has been a story that has been in the public domain, for a very, for quite a few years now. It kind of goes along with, some of those Sherlock Holmes stories that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, or Dracula by Bram Stoker. It's something that has been around long enough that it is considered the public domain. So we were going to get these English translations of these French adaptations of some of Robert E. Howard's original stories, starting with The Queen of the Black Coast in the Cimmerian #1, which was scheduled to be published this year, first issue in October. But then something happened. The powers that be, those that do own, who do control the trademark to Conan the Barbarian and those characters that were created by Robert E. Howard and so on. Those that are in charge of dishing out the licenses, to people or companies like Marvel to publish the licensed Conan comics, which allows them to use the name on the cover and all of that kind of stuff. Well, they stepped in and went to Diamond Comics distributors. And if you don't know much about, the comic book publishing, distributing world, if you go to a comic book store or a place that sells comic books, those comic books did not arrive in that story direct from the comic book companies in most cases. The DC comics didn't come from DC. The Marvel comics didn't come from Marvel. Instead, they go through a distributor. And the big number one distributor for comic books in the U.S. by far is Diamond. And so the powers that be over the Conan trademark thing basically issued a cease and desist order to Diamond to basically, put a stop on, do not distribute these Sumerian comics from Ablaze. Do not put these in stores for people to buy. So, as it stands right now, it would appear that come October, even if you had already pre-ordered that comic, like I was one such person that had done that, pre-ordered the first issue of Queen of the Black Coast #1, I suppose come October, we will not be getting those comics. They will not be appearing on shelves in comic book stores, and so on and so forth, as far as I know, because Diamond evidently did not challenge in any way this cease and desist order. And at this point, we know very little about exactly what took place, what was said between the parties involved. Now, you can go to social media. There was one tweet on Twitter that I know of by the president of Conan Properties International, Frederick Malmberg, who answered a question about this situation. And he said, and I quote, "We do that when anyone tries to take advantage of our copyrights and trademarks without a license. In fact, several years ago, we had a deal in place for those overseas until that publisher decided to proceed without a license. That's all I want to and can comment." Okay, so that's really about all that we have from that side of the thing. And to my knowledge, there has been no statement from Ablaze, the publisher that was going to put out these public domain comic books based on Robert E. Howard stories. So, what's the real story here? Who is in the right and that kind of thing? I can't say for certain. I can only voice my own thoughts, my own opinions, and that's all that they are, is opinions. And to me, it just seems that, the idea that Queen of the Black Coast and other original Howard stories from the 1930s, that those stories are part of the public domain, seems perfectly clear. And if Ablaze or anyone else has not violated anything as far as the trademarks are concerned, if they are following the rules within the lines of public domain, then I see no reason why they should not be allowed to proceed, or why the powers that be would step in. except of course, money. They're trying to sell, the quote unquote official licensed Marvel comics, so that they don't want any competition there of any kind. And of course, they're the ones at this point, I would say, that probably have the money, the backing, the ability to intimidate and put the fear in someone like Diamond or Ablaze to basically put a stop on these comic books, which, if they are in the public domain, and they certainly appear to be, there is no good reason why they should not be allowed to publish and distribute these comic books if they are keeping within the guidelines of things and those stories are in fact in the public domain. So that rather saddens me because I was looking forward to finally being able to take a look at some of those European published comics, translated into English and all of that. I suppose it's still possible to jump through the hoops to get the foreign language versions, the original French versions, but it would have been really nice to have these comic books in English. And, that's not to say that was in any way going to take away from me also pursuing and following, the trademarked licensed Marvel comics either. I've been buying those, and I was still going to continue to buy those, along with the Sumerian comics that Ablaze was going to publish. So, I don't really see the issue there, but hey, when money is involved, I think we all know how that greed and other things, how that can sort of take over the situation. So it certainly is a disappointing thing as a Conan fan. Now, I would say that in all of this, I do not blame Marvel. So I'm in no way calling for like a boycott of Marvel comics because, cool heads need to prevail here, and we got to realize that Marvel is simply a license holder. Marvel is not the one that issued the cease and desist. Marvel is not in ownership of those trademarks. Marvel is simply the company that those things have been licensed to, and they're doing their own thing. So I don't see any need to put a blame on Marvel here or try to call for some kind of a boycott or something like that. I plan to continue to read Marvel's Conan comics. I just wish that I also could have been able to read Ablaze's Sumerian comics because, Queen of the Black Coast, we had the old Roy Thomas adaptation of that story back in the day, and then Dark Horse did it as well during the time that they held the license. And I think a lot of Conan fans felt that was probably the bleakest era of the Dark Horse Conan comics run. I know a lot of people were very disappointed among Conan and Howard fans on the direction that Dark Horse went with their Conan comics when they reached the Queen of the Black Coast Belit storyline. So it would have been really neat to see this adaptation done by a company that claims, that they're trying to be very true to and, totally uncensored and that kind of thing in how they were going to present this adaptation of Queen of the Black Coast, and presumably they would follow that up then with adaptations of other Howard public domain works, giving them the same treatment. So again, as a Conan fan, I find the whole situation rather disappointing, kind of sad, and, I hope that perhaps some way, somehow, that these English versions of these comics by Ablaze can somehow, see the light of day. Because in a way, it's kind of ironic that, Robert E. Howard, writing about barbarism versus civilization, you think about the barbarian as kind of being, in a way, the quote unquote little guy, the underdog, being crushed beneath the heels, the forward momentum of civilization. And that's kind of what it seems like here. You've got this kind of small upstart, little rebellious comic book publisher, Ablaze, that's not really known for much of anything at this point. And they're trying to do this thing, and here comes the might of civilization, with its lawyers and its trademarks and its legal fees and all this kind of stuff. And to me, the fact that Robert E. Howard, the fact that the bulk of his stories, that in a way they belong to all of us, they are public domain, they belong to all of us, to me, in a way, is kind of very much in that independent, barbaric spirit embodied by Conan and Robert E. Howard himself. And, to see those that hold the legal trademark over certain things, throwing their might, throwing their weight around in order to keep things the way that they want them to be. In many ways, I see that kind of flying in the face of everything that Robert E. Howard's writing and the character of Conan is all about and stands for. Okay, so that's all I've got on that situation, just some of my thoughts and opinions. Please let me know what you think about the situation. Did you even know this was a thing? Was this something that was even on your radar? So, let me know what you think. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't done so. And we'll see you next time. Later.